And welcome back to another episode of The Outer Rim Rambling with myself, the Outlaw Adam Neeson, joined as always by my lover, partner, the Jedi Knight, Danny Brown. How are you doing, mate?
I'm all good. I'm all good. Again, you keep revealing that we're lovers and partners, and it's against my Jedi code. You need to keep these things under wraps. I am good. It's getting real chilly. I had to. It started to snow here, and it's getting icy, and I had to put wee grippies on my shoes just to walk to work this morning.
Hmm,
So that's the level we're at. But I'm prepared. I don't want to fall. I don't want to slip and slide. How is it in Belfast? Are you slipping and sliding about the show?
not yet. It's more just rain, and
Mm.
I think inevitably I will fall at some point.
You can
Just
just feel it. Yeah.
not just in the snow, in life. Um,
Oh.
but joining us today, you might think we don't have a guest because we're already talking baloney. But joining us today is one of the most iconic characters who gives out one of the most iconic lines in A New Hope. It is Anthony Forrest, who's joining us today to chat all about being the move along Stormtrooper from A New Hope and more, of course, the fixer. Anthony, how are you, sir?
I'm very well, thanks. I'm good. I listened to that. Thanks for having me on the show.
Thanks for
Yeah,
joining us.
really
Yeah,
appreciate it. Yeah.
yeah. No, I'm in the south right now, but we're not getting any snow yet.
Hmm.
No,
Uh,
is it
yeah,
cold though?
I'm between Limerick and Newcastle West.
Oh.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
visiting my sisters. So yeah, I haven't seen it. It's been cold. I
Mhm.
agree. It's a cold spell that's going through, I think. So hopefully we're going to get a bit next week or after that. It'll brighten up a bit more.
Yeah, hopefully it'll sell. That's the thing, because it is during the day, it's quite bright blue skies,
Yeah.
but then the mornings and the evenings are grey and snowy and icy. And it's just even leaving work today, I was like, I'm gonna put my grippies on just in case the slush had started to freeze over, and in some areas it had. So no, I
You
was
have to,
glad.
yeah, you have to watch for the black ice, which is,
Yeah,
yeah,
that's why you know what I highly recommend £5 and trespass. Get your grippies, your shoe grippies on.
We
So
were we were promised global warming, and I still don't have it.
yeah, this is the no. To be fair, like last week, I was still so surprised. I was like, we're still getting like between 10 and 13 degrees, like in
yeah.
November. What's going on? And no, I spoke too soon. We've been struck.
Mhm.
Well, the thing that's interesting, I find with climate change is we all expect global warming, but it's not so much about it's just generally the climate changes between extremes.
Mhm.
Yep.
And so that's why we're having extreme rain conditions. That's why we're having extreme hurricane conditions and that. It's more about extremes than it is about necessarily the heat or obviously places, Portugal, Spain, places like that, or a lot of places are experiencing some extreme temperatures that they've not had for either, I don't know, maybe as long as they can remember.
Even the wind here, the all the extreme winds we've had. Our fence came down in February there, and it was just like, oh, this isn't usual. Can you remember a time there was as many like yellow to red weather warnings? Like, not
Mm.
in my lifetime anyway. But anyway, I didn't think we'd be starting this podcast talking about the climate, but here we are. Here we are. Let's get stuck in, Anthony.
Yeah,
How did you get involved in Star Wars? At the time, it was just Star Wars.
yeah.
How did you get involved? How did you become Fixer and the Move Along Stormtrooper?
Well, the at that time I was actually working in the UK. I'd done a TV series for the BBC. And there was a few other things. I'd done quite a few commercials actually with directors at that time who nobody knew them because they were commercials directors trying to break out. So I did a bunch of commercials with Ridley Scott. I did
Hmm.
some with Adrian Lynn. I did well. Nicholas Rogue is already he was already breaking out, but there was quite a big commercials industry in London at that time in the early '70s that was a lot of young filmmakers, directors, and that who wanted to obviously move into feature and find a way to move into feature and also sustain themselves. And the commercial industry at that time was spending huge amounts on each commercial.
Hmm.
I think it's a lot less so today because it's much more diversified in where their money spends in marketing, and that is, now they're splitting it between the commercials and then also between the internet and other things like that. But at that time, the big focus with commercial commercials on television and that. And many of the commercials as well were not only made. I did a commercials for Polaroid, and we went to Greece to film them. But we were filming in different languages, different setups and things like that for different territories.
Hmm.
So London was a real hotbed for the commercials industry. I'm sure it is to a certain extent, but at that time it was really flourishing. And also, as I said, there were huge budgets that were being thrown around in order to make a commercial.
Mhm.
And so that was how I started. Is basically I was working in London. I done a series called Anne of Green Gables. No, Anne of Avonlea. The original was Anne of Green Gables, and it was a sequel to. It was the second part of the books. And I kind of fell into it. It was one of those things where you get yourself an agent, and then the agent will send you out on castings and things like that. And it was one of those castings where they were looking at that time. There were quite, and I'm probably still today. There's quite a few either Canadian or American actors that were based in London.
Hmm.
And so a lot of the productions that came out of Los Angeles or the States and that were looking uh, predominantly for actors who had a either Canadian or U.S. background, especially if they're going to be taking speaking roles. Nowadays, I think a lot of Brits actors or UK-based actors are just as good as the American actors, something better than Americans
Yeah.
in terms of what they can do. So it's that's the talent pool is huge and very experienced. And so I went along and I was invited to a casting. Irene Lamb was the casting director. She at that time contacted my agent, and I went along and I didn't have any idea who I was meeting or anything. I was just given an address in Soho Square, which was the 20th Century Fox building in Soho Square. And I went into this blank room and sitting this behind a pretty basic desk with not a lot on the walls. It's just basically a service room, that I guess people coming into town could use for meetings and things. And there was George Lucas. And that was how it really started is getting invited to sit down and have a conversation and then take a look at the script and that. And then it was not long after that my agent said they'd like you to play the character of the Fixer. And then the process starts where you go and you get a medical check, especially because you're going to Tunisia, so you have to have a health check for insurance. And you go to wardrobe, costume fittings, and things like that. And so the process starts, and then you have another few weeks, and then an idea of when you're going to be going. And for me, we're just coming through a winter. And I can't remember how bad the winter of January, February of '76 was. The summer was really hot, but the January, February was, I can't remember how bad the winter, but I was just glad to get to the sun.
Hmm.
So, there's a certain bonus to shooting on location, especially when they pick nice locations.
Hmm. 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 And then, so you auditioned, you got given the role of Fixer, and you've gone into costume. Just in regards to Fixer's costume,
Yeah.
so he's kind of got, was it like a leather jacket you
Well,
had on?
it's not leather. It's kind of it's like a silky material.
Like a
It was
okay,
I think it was like an Air Force jacket or something like that. It went,
yeah.
there was a lot of in London, there was a lot of military looking gear floating around because you have to remember this is '76 and we're just coming out of the Vietnam War.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so there's a lot of, it's important, I think, to put some timestamps on some of the events, political and otherwise, that were happening. What a lot of people kind of forget is 1976, we were right in the punk movement.
Yeah.
And I used to live not far from a pub called the Roebuck Pub down off Kings, which was on Kings Road. And that's where a lot of the punk scene was, because a lot of people used to drink in the Roebuck, and across the street was Vivian Westwood and Malcolm McLaren's studio,
Yeah.
and so as designers in that. And I think that's where Malcolm McLaren kind of picked up on the punk scene and hooked into the Sex Pistols. So it was Kings Road at that time. Now it's all gentrified. I mean, you can't even recognize it. But at that time, there was a lot of great pubs and there was a lot of great atmosphere going on. It was
Hmm.
still a rollover from the '60s.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
And I was just thinking in terms of the costume the fixture wears, because I thought it was more like a leather jacket, but you're right, it's sort of like a pilot's jacket. But
Yeah.
going out to Tunisia in that jacket, were you not like, I know you said you were looking forward to going out in the sun, but you're not
Yeah.
sweltered with all those kind of, you look quite layered up in the boots and everything that the character was wearing. Was it, I'm assuming the Sand Trooper was a more difficult costume to wear in that heat, but what was Fixer's kind of costume like, and what was the character like? Because ultimately, the cut we get doesn't have Fixer. Fixer doesn't appear in it. We don't
Yeah.
get Toshi Station. But could you tell us a bit about the process of Fixer and Fixer's story and how you got into that character and the costume and that sort of thing?
Well, you're not, when you play the smaller roles, you're not exactly sitting around getting a lot of background detail.
Yeah, yeah.
You're kind of bringing, as in many situations, it's about what you try to bring to it.
Hmm, hmm.
And I think a lot of directors, they will kind of go, let me see what you got. Show me what's your take on this. And then they'll say if that's not where they think they should be going, they'll say something about it, right? And they'll step into that. But a lot of directors just like to sit back and see where it goes, as opposed to implementing is sort of some kind of direction on it. It's the creative process is as it should be. Is everybody brings something to the table, and so hopefully what you're bringing to the table is interesting, different. It adds a bit of spice to it in one way or another, and it's a little more flavor.
Hmm.
And so I kind of looked at it and I thought, I kind of tried to understand. And one of the things that I recognized in the script in that was uh, because Fixer has a relationship with Cammy,
Hmm.
and he's got Tashi Station, and he's got his life pretty much sorted out in terms of not what he's not necessarily going to cash it all in and decide to go off and fight in battles and that when he's got a setup that he's already working with. And he doesn't necessarily, he's not necessarily enamored by the idea of, he's not looking for adventure because he's pretty settled in the situation that he is. So I pretty much took it that he was he's a guy that's running a garage, and he's got some skills and some talents in that, but he's not really out there, he's not looking to fight any big battles.
Yeah.
I think though I did in going through it, try to understand the fact of what might have happened in the storyline. If the Fixer character and Cammy were followed more, it would have seemed to me to be logical that the troopers and the Empire would have come looking to Tashi Station, and that would have, to a certain extent, put Fixer and Cammy in jeopardy. And I always imagined that Fixer and Cammy would have taken off to escape that situation, and I saw them going to a dewback graveyard to hide out.
Ooh, yeah,
I,
okay.
yeah,
Oh, yeah.
I can imagine these huge, skeletons of dewbacks in the
Hmm.
dewback graveyard, and the troopers in that won't go there because they're just kind of like it's like voodoo or something like that. There's an energy there that they've been always forewarned not to go there.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Because
so there was kind of that idea in my mind is if that had happened, if that had followed that sequence. But it was so you kind of you're left to allow your own imagination to start to filter in to how you would handle it. And a lot of the movements in that, especially in the Fixer sequence, that's the choreography of what we're doing. That's basically our own stuff. That's our own interactions trying to come forward and see how you would block out the scene, which
yeah,
is the most comfortable and the most natural.
yeah, yeah.
Did you ever share these thoughts with George at the time, or even with Mark Hamill to sort of come up with the relationship between the two characters?
Um, it's a funny story. I had met basically the first night I arrived in Tunisia. I mean, Mark had already been there, right? And so I had a drink at the bar with Mark. And the first thing Mark said to me, he said, he was a little bit pissed because the land speeder cost more than his salary. So, so we had to talk about it, and that's just filmmaking. And also you have to remember the first film was on a tight budget in
Mhm.
terms of what its expectations were, or for George Lucas, and that it's our a director's imagination in that, especially if it's involved in the writing process as well, will want to want to have everything, and so there's limitations to what is possible. But I think that in the circumstances, Mark and I didn't really get into a discussion about who Fixer was and stuff like that. It's pretty obvious that from the script and from the dialogue that's in the script that Luke was coming to Tashi Station because this is where he would go to hang out. This is downtime, right? This is just somewhere to chill and hang out. And so anyone, we've got to imagine you're pretty remote. Imagine this is in Tatooine. This is farm boy country, really.
Yeah.
So I think that was pretty self-evident in the script, and so we kind of just followed along from that idea of living somewhere which is remote and there's not an awful lot to do, and just drag racing, things like that. These are all classic situations that you're playing with.
And classically, you hear like behind the scenes stories that the crew weren't really too confident in how George was telling the story, or even what, it's hard to say now that, you're making a Star Wars movie, so obviously you know what theme you're going for. Whereas back
Yeah.
then it was sort of like it's got the like good side and bad side. Could you feel that on set?
Yeah, I mean, there's all such there's not many film sets I've been on where there hasn't been tension for one reason or another.
Hmm.
This tension was really about the fact that I believe George Lucas was coming into the UK is pretty much an unknown. The only what If we go back in time, in that period, films like American Graffiti hadn't hit the UK yet. It used to be, the window was maybe a 4 to 6 month window before films were being moved across from North America to Europe, to the UK and Europe. So anybody working had not on it. I was fortunate because I'd gone back and forth, and so I had actually seen it, so I understood what he'd managed to do with American Graffiti. I had an idea that he actually, he kind of knows what he's doing here. He's managed to put it together. And the problem was, I think for a lot of the crew, that a lot of the crew had worked on some really major feature films. They'd worked on Lawrence of Arabia. They had been working in the industry for a long time with some of the great directors and cinematographers and people like that. So they had a really and a lot of big Hollywood stars. So they were well oiled and they knew their stuff. The lighting crews, people like that, the camera crews and stuff. They had a wealth of experience that they were bringing to the table. And the one thing that for those people who haven't necessarily directly interacted with George Lucas is George is quite shy. He's not a very outspoken person. And so he's not somebody who shares an awful lot of what he's thinking. And where there are other directors who want to share everything, and include everybody in it. And so I think that there was a feeling that there was not a lot of simpatico. And I also think that there was some issues between Gil Taylor, who's a cinematographer, who basically pretty much on film, a lot of film crews will look to the cinematographer for guidance because the cinematographer holds a really high esteemed position. And Gil Taylor was an extremely well versed and well experienced cinematographer. And the interesting thing is, years later, I was in Los Angeles and I met with Richard Donner, who was around the same time was making Superman. And Richard Donner said to me, he said, "I've got a Star Wars story for you." And I said, "Oh, okay." And in those days in Los Angeles, a lot of the directors were even not. I don't know if it's true today, but a lot of the directors, especially the younger ones, were all in touch with each other. So Spielberg, Brian De Palma, people like that, even Martin Scorsese, they all, they could all pick up the phone and talk to each other, and that's a process whereby, somebody will say, well, I need a cameraman. Do you know who's good? Or, who could you recommend? A lot of times it's personal recommendations.
Yeah.
Have you ever worked with this person, and you get a personal recommendation? It's not about what's on the piece of bio, and it's not about what their agents are saying. It's a personal recommendation for somebody who you might respect or in the industry. And so Richard Donner said, George Lucas phoned him and he said, you got my cinematographer, the one I wanted, who is now working on Superman. He'd kind of snatched, Richard Donner got in there first. Who would is there anybody you could recommend? And the funny thing is, Richard Donner had done a movie called with Gregory Peck. It's a really good psychological thriller, kind of it's The Omen.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
He'd just done The Omen with Gil Taylor as the cinematographer. And so Richard Donner said he recommended Gil Taylor for Star Wars.
Mm.
And that's how Gil Taylor ended up being the cinematographer. Because Richard Donner, see, a lot of the young filmmakers at that time had wanted to, especially if they were coming to Europe, they wanted to work with people who had worked on 2001 Space Odyssey.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because Kubrick had made such an impact with that film and the possibilities of taking a story to space and actually feeling like it, and the his ingenuity and his ideas, and that really influenced a lot of the filmmakers. And so they wanted to be able to work with as many people as they could who, especially if you're doing anything to do with sci-fi and that, who had worked on 2001. So if you look at the list, then Douglas Trumbull, who was the supervising special effects on 2001, got snatched up by Steven Spielberg for Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And his second in command was John Dykstra. Where did John Dykstra end up? On Star Wars.
Yeah.
Right. So you see the kind of interplay that goes on between the various, when there's casting of actors, but then you're also casting your crew. You're casting your cinematographer, you're casting your art department, you're casting all these roles as well. So that's the casting process in its own way. And there are some directors who are fortunate enough to be able to work with the same crews over and over. I understand Clint Eastwood has pretty much worked for years with the same crews, gets the same people, and so it becomes like a family, it becomes like a team. And that's what you're putting together on a film is if we want to talk football, you're the manager and you're putting together your team. You're scouting and you're pulling in those people that are going to be, I need a right back, or I need a goalie, and so that's kind of a similar process in filmmaking in a way.
So going from The Fixer, how
Yeah.
did you become? Because you hadn't auditioned for the Sand Trooper. It was just kind of, they had people on set and they were like, right, you can fit in this, or is that how did you become involved as the Sand Trooper then?
There was something that I was never informed or given the complete background of what happened. But I was at the hotel because I wasn't due to film for another couple of days. And all of a sudden, Robert Watts showed up at the hotel and said, George wants to see you on the set. And so that was when we drove out to the set, and George was standing there waiting with a script in his hand, and took me aside, and we had a conversation. And that was, this obviously was a moment where they were in a bit of a bind because they needed somebody to play this scene.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And you've got to remember, you're in the middle of Tunisia, and you're not exactly going to pick up the phone to London and say, give me an actor out here.
Yep.
It's kind of like, well, who can I approach to maybe get this done in the circumstances we're under? And that is, that's kind of really what happened is George gave me his script, and as I was walking to where the actual scene is, they were dressing me. I had no idea what I was going to look like.
Mm-hmm.
There were no, I didn't even see what I was looking like in terms of, there were no mirrors or anything like that around. This was not a costume fitting. This was just, just slapping the costume onto me and me trying to figure out what the hell am I walking, that's not an easy costume to move around in. And you can appreciate yeah.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
And
I've been there. I've tried it.
Yeah. Also in sand, walking around in sand is not, when they put the backpack on me, I almost fell over because I wasn't expecting that.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and usually what they will do is they will fill it with something, even, when you give an actor, if you see an actor carrying a suitcase in a film, you can usually tell the ones that are carrying empty suitcases.
More swing.
Yeah, more swing. It just looks too light, right?
Mhm.
Whereas, as we all know, if you've got a full suitcase, there's a little more to it than that. Yeah. So any smart person in the props department or anything like that will fill up the suitcase with stuff so you've got some weight in it. Yeah. So I was walking and they were dressing me. They were getting me ready, and then I walked around the corner and there was a setup and I was introduced to Alec Guinness and that. I'd already met Mark. Um, and so there was a sense that they were running behind schedule, that they needed to get this sequence shot. Yeah, I was blessed to be able to have an opportunity to play a scene with Sir Alec Guinness. I mean, that was that's one of the greats of the industry. That's just one of the greats of the theater. A huge amount of respect for his talent and his work and his kindness. He was very kind to me. I think he understood that I was just being thrown into this and I think he understood that this was this some young guy who's all of a sudden got to play this scene out of nowhere.
Mhm.
Uh, and I had when you look at a script, you can read the script, but then you focus on your role. You're not necessarily you know. So I knew, and also you have to remember, nothing was Sand Troopers or Stormtrooper. Everything was just Trooper in the original screenplay. All the different names in that came out later.
Mhm. And then how did you so did Alec kind of talk to you about how he was going to do, these aren't the droids you're looking for? Was there any kind of talk around how the Jedi mind trick was kind of work, or was it just a case of he's going to say this line to you and you're going to say it back to him, or as you say,
It was very much in the time that I had to actually memorize the lines and work on this, look at the script, I realized that what I'm basically playing a cop doing a roadblock.
yeah.
That's what, and I've had that happen to me. So I actually knew where in my mind I needed to go in order to get the energy and the attitude that I at that time that I felt, because I read it and I kind of go, this is I've experienced this. I know what it's like to get stopped by the cops like that in a roadblock.
Hmm.
So I didn't have any problem identifying with that and remembering what the attitude of the police officers were at that time, which is full of authority and doing what they see as their job. We didn't have a big conversation going into it, but after we had a chance to chat and things like that, and he was. I think one of the things you have to remember is I think he recognized, simply because of his wisdom about the craft, he recognized how important that scene was in terms of, when you look back now, this is the first time you actually see that level of the force in operation.
Yeah.
And I think that was one of the things he knew, and that's why he wanted to, he made sure that to nail that and to give it the right tone and the right feeling. And so it was really, it was just a great chance to work with him, and a very, very sweet, kind man. Yeah, very generous with his patience and his talent.
That's great to hear.
He was the Jedi Master on set.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was. He's a Jedi Master on set, but a Jedi Master in life as well.
Hmm.
Very, very humble man.
Hmm.
Um, and so, to get on stage and do that level of work and attain that level of recognition in that, obviously it takes a certain amount of drive and ambition in that. But at the same time, it takes, in order to perfect those roles and to understand those characters and that to the deepest levels, it also takes a great level of humanity, and that's why I think over the years we've many times heard of actors who have breakdowns or actors who have, issues, because when they go into the roles, they're many roles, especially if you're doing Shakespeare and that, they're incredibly challenging. One, because there have been so many great performers who've gone on before you, and so it's always another. And there, this is there's an awful lot of history in theater that you're standing on the shoulders of many greats. So that was, yeah, we had a good time coming on the plane back because he was very sweet. I was sitting next to Mark and that, and Sir Alec and his wife were sitting, and they'd taken, I guess, 10 rows of the seats out of the front of the plane to put camera equipment in and everything. And Sir Alex spotted a case of champagne there, and he went over and he got a bottle, and he gave one to Mark, and he gave one to me, and he and his wife had one. So when Mark and I got back to Heathrow Airport, we were a little bit hammered.
Very good. And then was all your filming done in Tunisia, or did you do anything when you got back to, was it Pinewood?
Yeah, no, it was Elstree. Elstree.
Elstree, yes, aye.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
did
yeah.
you do any sort of additional scenes in Elstree, or was most of your work done in Tunisia?
Um, all of the Sand Trooper stuff was done in Tunisia.
Hmm.
Shot the exteriors for the fixer role in Tunisia, and then we shot the interiors at Elstree Studios.
Yes.
They had built the interior set. There was no interiors in Tunisia. They didn't build anything interior there. It was all built at Elstree, one for control in that, and also to get the design elements and things that they were looking for in order to create Tashi Station in the way it was envisaged by the art director. Yeah,
You mentioned there about the troopers being like cops, being traffic cops.
yeah.
Have you seen the fan-made short film Troopers that is a take on the TV show Cops?
No, no, I haven't. No, no.
No, I must send you the link for it. It's very good. You know the
Yeah,
cops of what you're going to do when they come for you, but it's all sand troopers doing, arresting Jawas and sort of
okay.
getting on like that. So just when you mentioned there, you were
Yeah,
thinking you got in the headspace of a cop at a traffic
yeah,
stop. It just
yeah,
reminded me of Troopers. And just wondering if you'd seen it. Must send
yeah,
you. I think you'd like it.
yeah.
I think you'd enjoy it.
Yeah,
Um,
I think I mean, I can absolutely see that, and I can absolutely see the fans who do fan films and stuff like that.
mhm.
Recognizing that that's what that moment was, and it's not an unfamiliar scene, whether it's in science fiction or in reality.
Yeah, yeah, that's
I'm,
it. Just space cops.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm sure there was a couple of gentlemen in Belfast in 1978 that probably really recognized that scene.
Yeah, I actually we were driving back from Limerick, and there was because it's getting into the Christmas time and that the Garda were having some road stops. I don't think they were checking people necessarily for drinking, but as it comes around that time of year, it
Mhm.
becomes an important factor in making sure that nobody's going home. Because as we get into December, we have a lot of Christmas parties,
Yeah.
office parties, and things like that. Yeah,
Yeah, so the trippers are out doing tire checks and breathalyzers.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Hmm. Hmm.
yeah,
Um, so you mentioned there about, fans and fan films, and I know you've done quite a few different fan conventions because I met you about 11, 12 years ago, where
right.
you signed my Power of the Force Sand Trooper figure with Anthony Forrest Move Along Sand Trooper. So I was chuffed, and I remember at the time you'd saying about, you'd played the Fixer, and
Yeah,
you kind of talked a bit about your role in that, which I really appreciated because as a fan, you were one of the first Star Wars actors I'd met, and you took the time to actually talk to me about it. And even the fact you said you'd never seen the Tri logo uh,
right. Yeah.
card before, so I was just like, it was a nice interaction. And it's even the fact you've joined us today just shows that you're very good with your time with the fans, and we really appreciate that. But then you've just gone on to see so much from fans at cons and that sort of thing, and the different costumes, and the fact that people do the sand trooper now and do the whole move along thing.
Yeah.
How do you feel going from, as you say, they didn't think it was going to be as big a thing, it was a tight budget then, to suddenly becoming this worldwide phenomenon and thing? There's the 501st Legion is spawned so much. How does it feel being a part of something that at that time they weren't sure if it was going to work?
Well, I mean, I think just from my perspective, it's kind of interesting when you start out with something, seeing when it was absolutely just at the very beginning,
Hmm.
when it's just really in its complete infancy, and nobody, has any idea of where it's going to go, or you remember, I'm sure we all have a lot of films that we've liked, but we might never see them again.
Hmm.
We might watch them once or twice if we're lucky, or maybe, have a copy of it in our library or things like that. But we don't necessarily revisit a lot of films. I don't think people generally do revisit them. And so it's quite interesting when you work on a project and it just keeps going. The life of it keeps being regenerated. I possibly am meeting the fourth generation of Star Wars fan.
Mhm.
When you get down to you know, which are now the grandfathers and then the sons, and the sons have now had children or they're very little and stuff like that. But it's kind of interesting when you actually see, I can, I have a way of compare. It's a little bit like if your family were into a particular football team or they're into a particular sports team, and that stays in that family. We've always been, for instance, Liverpool supporters or something like that, and it becomes a generational thing. And that's one of the interesting things with Star Wars. It is very unusual for a film to become a generational influence
Yeah.
in people's lives. And I meet many fans, and and when they say they're a collector, and they explain what they've collected and stuff like that, and their first thing, one of the things that say I'm leaving it to my kids. And so that's quite unusual in the film world. That's quite unusual to have that. We've had it from some other, big franchises and that, like Star Trek, and now you have, things like Harry Potter and that. But Star Wars definitely has a life of its own. Star Wars is really owned by the fans.
Hmm. Hmm.
The longevity is really down to fans.
And how do you feel? Because I know I mentioned to you before that one of the first costumes I got when I started doing Star Wars costuming
Yeah,
was the Sand Trooper,
right.
and I loved when because people immediately recognize you because of the orange pauldron, the big rifle, the
Mhm.
backpack. Your armor's dirtier compared to all the rest of the
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
stormtroopers. And I would have people coming up to me, especially dads coming up and being like, "You're my favorite." And
Yeah, yeah.
when people meet you, I'm sure they're like, you're the first stormtrooper to kind of get Jedi mind tricked, and I'm sure you get people who are just like your stormtrooper, your trooper stands out
Right.
because of that moment and because of just the look. The sand trooper look is that bit more iconic than
Yeah.
all the rest of the stormtroopers. How does it feel to kind of have that reception? Because I know for myself, as say, having somebody come up and be like, "You're my favorite stormtrooper," was like, "Oh wow," So
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well,
yeah.
I mean, it's like, it's always nice to have people recognize some things that you've done, or that they're happy for you, and it's like anybody's would be crazy to say that when you go to a convention or something, you have all these people, you get a lot of love from the fans.
Mhm.
And I've known several, actors who are really well established in the industry who've not necessarily done a lot of conventions that, and then they always go away, go, wow, that's really, it's really enlightening to feel that kind of appreciation.
Mhm.
It's very humbling. It
Yeah,
really is. It's very humbling. Yeah.
yeah,
And I always thank the fans for that, because the fans are very kind. And in this crazy world we live in, it's kind of nice to have kind moments.
yeah, yeah. And I think it's great whenever people like yourself and others, I'll never forget Paul Black that played Greedo.
Yeah, yeah,
Again, was another person that I met at one of the Belfast W5 conventions, and he again spent time talking and sort of telling stories from sets and that sort of thing. And I think it's great that there are people like yourselves that do make time for the fans and share their stories.
right.
I
Yeah,
think
and the fans. What's amazing. I will be the first to admit that possibly never know as much as the fans do about
Mhm,
Star Wars.
mhm,
My actual basic knowledge of Star Wars is very, very limited, but I know that there are fans who absolutely know it. Know the Bible, as they
mhm.
call it. They know the Bible. They know the arc of everything. They know all the intricacies. They know all the details, and they know all the background, and so they're deeply involved in knowing the encyclopedia that has become Star Wars. Whereas for myself, it's I just couldn't comprehend gathering all that amount of information, and it's And maybe because I've never even done that with sports or anything like that. I've not been my original idea as a kid was wanting to be a professional baseball player.
Mhm.
But life throws things at you and takes you in different directions.
Whenever A New Hope is sort of coming out or it comes out, do they tell you beforehand that your character of the Fixer had been cut from the movie?
No, you don't. Um, there's an interesting things that happens in business and corporations, and I think this is just a kind of thing that I've observed, especially over the last few years, is the fact there's a word called secrecy, and not a lot of people want to share the information of what's going on. And in many cases, as an actor, you're the last to know. Nobody phones you up and says, "We're sorry, we've cut the scene from the film," and that they just get on. They have a focus and they have a direction that they want to get on with, and that's it. Their feeling in the industry tends to be that, they've hired you and that's the end of it. They're going to have their say and they'll, you know, thanks very much. And everybody gets on with their lives. So you don't really know what is happening. You don't know what is planned. And I'm sure this is not only for myself, I think this is also a situation for many of the bigger actors as well, who they're not necessarily kept in the picture of everything that's going on. A lot of people sometimes who I've known over the years feel they're left in the dark and they would like to know more.
Mhm.
And I don't know, maybe it's somebody, executives or something, saying, "Well, these are just dumb actors. What do they? They're no longer needed in the stage of the production or the marketing." Or actors now, I understand, are starting to kick back against having to do press junkets
Mhm.
and not wanting to do as many press junkets and things like that, simply because it's very exhausting. And it can tie you up for a year on a big film if you're doing I've not been involved in that. I think the closest I came to that was doing interviews in New York for Elstree 76, which was a documentary. But
Mhm.
I can understand there are actors who are the major stars in films being dragged around and having to do an awful lot of interviews and that, and the corporations see that as part of the job.
Mm.
And so actors do sign up for it, but then in some cases, I think that they are starting to question whether or not they should have a little more say in the process, and also whether or not they should actually be doing that process at all.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, it's you all of a sudden you move from being a creative individual to being part of the marketing machine.
Yeah, definitely.
Mhm.
And you see a
Yeah.
lot of, especially with like Marvel, where it is so secretive, you see a lot of the actors now sort of joking that they're going to spoil some things, but realistically, that might be them saying, I'm putting my hand up to be like, don't put me on the press tour because I will say things I don't want to.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, y- there is a little bit, in a way, there's a certain natural rebellion within artists to fight against the what many artists see as the system.
Mhm.
And Hollywood has had that over and over for decades. Um, One of the first people to actually really do that was James Stewart and Frank Capra, and I can't remember who the writer was, but they set up a company to make It's a Wonderful Life, and they went outside the system. And apparently, the reason It's a Wonderful Life as a movie shows it up at Christmas is all the time is because they gave it away.
Mhm.
Mhm.
You know, they there's a fierce independence in the heart of actors, and so often they will knock heads with corporations
Yeah.
for one reason or another. Yeah.
Well, it's the same with George. At a certain point, he sort of distanced himself. Him as an artist, as a director, and you obviously saying he's a sort of shy guy. He has over the years until he sort of sold it to Disney. He fought the system. He fought the big studios.
Well, I think there is a point, and this has to do with money, etc. People within the industry will start out simply because there's the age and initial belief in that. But then a lot of people do capitulate to the system as well. They become part of the system itself. and simply because the power of the system is such that people get sucked into it. And that's always, that's a danger in the sense of I don't know how many filmmakers there have been that have stayed true and really been the renegades. I can think of two. Orson Welles, total renegade. He went up against Hollywood. Stanley Kubrick, very much a renegade, you know. And there are filmmakers who do that and they say, no, this is my craft. I'm an art. This is my art. You know, don't mess, screw me around with that. And so they fight back, and many of them, like they get pushed out, and which is unfortunate because they're huge talents. But so there's a very fine line between working in what is really, when you look at it, and especially today, an incredibly expensive industry. The cost of making a film, if you put it at $200 million just to make the film, that's not necessarily considering the marketing and the promotion of the film. When you're spending $200 million, think of the number of corporations or what you could do with $200 million. You could build a hospital. And so that area, especially for the investors and many of the studios are run by accountancy teams. There was a point where directors would go filming and they would be on location filming and they would see the rushes, but none of the editing would have started, right? There might be what starts to be an assembly of the footage. But in certain cases, there were directors who would say, nobody edits this film until I have the time to see all the material. Because you don't know what you're missing that somebody else back at the studios might have cut out. And you might go, no, I need that. That's a shot that I could have used, or that's a moment that I could have used. And today that's very difficult for directors to do because they're trying to cut the films as fast as possible to start getting the trailers out there and getting the returns and getting the interest piped up about the project. Whereas directors used to have a gap where they would come back and they would have a couple of weeks where they could actually, chill out and refocus, because you're changing your mindset from being on a location or being in the studio filming to now changing your mindset to becoming an editor, or thinking with the editors and working with the editors. There's three stages I always think of filmmaking. You have this scripting and everything like that, and you get into the casting and that. And that's one stage, and the writing is paramount. Then the next stage is actually making the production. But the final third stage becomes in many ways the most crucial stage of the production, which is the editing stage and the post-production stage. And I'm sure, all of us have seen films that actually, if we thought about it, that could have been a better film if they'd taken more time editing it, or taken more time thinking about the story. And yet this race to get the film finished and get it out there is actually harming the production in the end, because they're not taking those extra weeks or extra couple of months to get it right. It's a craft, and it's like anything. If it's a craft and you're making a piece of pottery or you're making a painting or you're writing a book or anything, you have to give it the time to develop and to come to its full fruition.
I think even Star Wars is the perfect example of that, where Lucas had his first cut, showed it to friends like De Palma, and they were like, "What the hell's this?"
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's sad, but the one person who saved Star Wars has been kind of pushed to the one side, and that's Marcia Lucas.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And she is the genius. I mean, you only have to look at her body of work as an editor, and you understand her understanding of filmmaking and editing and telling a story, and having the emotional points, there is really down to Marcia Lucas.
Mhm.
She's a huge talent, and unfortunately she's kind of been pushed to one side. But I think hopefully in the future that she will truly get the recognition she deserves. She did win the Academy Award, but in terms of just in life recognition for her contribution and her insights is an editor.
And
Absolutely.
de
Very interesting.
definitely the fans of, the fandom of Star Wars definitely recognizes her work. There isn't a time you'll ever hear anybody talking about A New Hope without bringing up her name and how she sort of saved it.
Yeah, yeah. And that's and unfortunately that's the industry and the egos that run through it.
Mhm.
That that many people get crushed along the way. But it's that's it's still a great especially I can relate to a New Hope better than other films, but it's still a great film. It started the journey, and it's been a great resource for many people. It's been a great inspiration to other filmmakers. It's been an inspiration to fans and things like that. I meet so many fans that are incredibly talented that are exploring their talents through costuming or through artwork or things like that who have a huge amount of talents. Many of them are very capable of working in the industry itself. But and Star Wars has been for many people this kind of inspiration to spur them along and to want to get into that part of storytelling. Yeah, it's interesting, and it's we I've we see the system or the Hollywood system or the studio system or whatever system it is in the media, shaping and reshaping and changing. The internet has changed a huge amount. And now I'm sure AI and all the technologies that are coming forward will also reshape that and change those things as well. And we just have to learn how to maintain the creativity, whether or not we're using technical tools or whether or not we're using a piece of a paper and a pen on a blank piece of paper. It's all about the creative process
Yeah,
and how we use those tools. Right.
absolutely. With the you mentioned there about, you obviously associate most with the New Hope, but
Yeah,
have you gone on to watch any of the other Star Wars content? I'm assuming you've seen the original trilogy, but have you gone
yeah,
on to watch the
yeah. I
prequels,
did actually.
sequels, TV
Yeah,
shows?
yeah. There was a fan in Chicago. He sat me down and made me watch them, the
Yeah.
prequel. Yeah, yeah, he did. Yeah.
Okay, and what do you think? Did you enjoy
Yeah, I could
them?
see. Yeah, again, um, it's at that time. I think in the prequels there was an awful lot of playing going on with technology
Mhm.
and shooting with digital technology and things like that. One of the things, as we talked earlier on about the fact that I've worked in music, and so I've worked in some really good recording studios in London.
Yeah.
One of the things I've learned as a producer working on in music in that, especially when you have fantastic toys in front of you.
Mm.
And I had I was when I was working in London, it was in the very early '80s, and I had the best engineers in the world, and we were working on a desk that was the first SSL beta desk, which was in SARM Studios. And you had all these fantastic tools, and it was computerized mixing and things like that. But you can get completely lost in that process of playing with the toys and playing with the tools because the technology is fantastic and it's interesting in that you can get so lost you can lose why you're really there, and that's really about the song, and that's really about the performance in the studio, not playing with all the tools and and I think to a certain extent the prequels got lost because there was such a whole new bevy of tools to play with. Over experimentation, you know, is always can fall into that trap when somebody hands you a brand new toy and you just want to play with that toy instead of focusing on the story.
Yeah. Do you think that's where George kind of went with even the special editions of the original trilogy, was that he was that excited to
Playing,
play with
he's
his new
playing.
toys?
Yeah, he's playing. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Hmm.
It's fascinating when you see that new technologies and toys and stuff like that coming into the marketplace and all the things it can do is look at the fascination with AI right now. And so people get, of course, there's an initial, but at the same time, you have to also remember what are you doing? You're really out there to engage an audience and tell a story. And no matter how many explosions or how many special effects you throw in a film, it's not going to make the film any better if the story and the characters aren't there and the audience isn't hooked. So
There's one of the Disney Plus shows called The Book of Boba Fett, and there's a group of characters in there that are like sort of mod inspired. They're like a biker gang. They drive like
yeah,
mopeds, and I think if you were to ever to come back and play the Fixer, I think he would
Right.
fit in perfectly with that group of characters because it's based on Tatooine. It's
Yeah,
possible.
yeah, yeah. I know. Yeah, I know. There were some issues surrounding that because there was like in anything with films, there's always contractual issues that start to rear their heads.
Mhm.
And the thing with Book of Boba Fett was the fact that I didn't know that it was even existed until fans told me,
Mhm.
and then it was pointed out to me that the way that they cut the trailers and that made a lot of fans think it was me
Mhm.
or
Oh.
Stark as Cammy
Mhm.
Hmm.
because they had sliced. Editing is a very can be a very deceptive process, not for the editors, but for the people who are watching to understand what they're watching and because you can edit at very high speeds and stuff like that. So glimpses, and Star Wars fans are like that. They will see a glimpse of something in a trailer, and they'll immediately hone in on it and create a whole storyline on Reddit of what's
Yeah,
going on, you
yeah.
know, just from the trailer or the teaser.
Hmm. And just on that, then you sort of said, people were starting to think that the fixer when he was back, Cammy was back. That sort of leads into then well, and I hope you don't mind us talking about it
Yeah.
because we don't want to jeopardize anything with any cases, but you currently have a case with Disney, Lucasfilm, and George Lucas. Is that correct?
Yeah, it was, and I'm not the only one who was not aware of the situation. I mean, the questions had been raised in the past,
Mhm.
um, but there was never a situation where anyone decided to take it to the wall. Simply because when the Book of Boba Fett came up, and a fan wrote to me and said, "Oh, it's great to see you in the new Book of Boba Fett." That's when I had to say, "Well, where is this coming from?" My initial thought was, well, they were using CGI or they were using some other technology to replicate me and put it into the trailers and things like that. So that's when I started to do some investigation,
Mhm.
which I'd never considered doing before. It didn't even occur to me. I thought, well, everybody's a good guy in the story, and so, the Lucasfilm or George Lucas, they're not going to, why would they want to screw people? But then I discovered when I got a hold of the underlying agreements that we never saw, there were certain elements to the underlying agreements that were never allowed to be used or never allowed to agreed. And one of them is the fact that in 1990s there was releases in on CD-ROM of the fixer scenes, right?
Yes.
The scenes that weren't used
Yeah.
in the film, and then those that then ended up on DVDs is extras and things like that.
Yeah.
Well, under the law, under what is both contract, but also more importantly, copyright law, before you can reuse those, because the original contract was for the film, it wasn't for any other areas of exploitation. It wasn't for toys, and that's what's interesting. You won't find the word merchandising anywhere in the contracts. And this is where everybody's kind of scratched their head and gone, hang on, we never saw those underlying agreements, and it's not in there either. And so the process then started where I started doing more investigation to discover the fact that the under the equity contracts, they did not have merchandising, they did not have reuse rights to use it anywhere else, and they did not have derivative rights, which would be for DVDs and that, which also includes streaming rights. They any of those scenes of Fixter and of that Cammy and Biggs or Luke are in, right?
Mhm.
Especially for Cammy and Fixer, because we're not in the final film.
Yeah.
Whereas Biggs and Luke are in the final film. When a when your performance, and this is what a lot of people, I didn't even understand this until I started studying it. When you under your agreements, what you're doing as an actor when you sign into contract, you're basically licensing your performance to the production.
Mhm.
They're paying you for that license, so you're allowing them to use it. But there are certain definite limitations of what they can use it for and how they can exploit it. And what it appears to have happened with the first film, especially, was they've way overstepped the boundaries of what they were allowed to do. And so that was when I raised the issues, and I took it to some barristers and that, and along with Stark. And basically, the opinion from the barristers was the fact that this is fraud. Contracts are written for a very specific reason. And that's an agreement between two people. So when one person breaks that contract and goes beyond the boundaries of what the contract says, then you can either negotiate a new contract to cover that, which is what should have happened with Fixer and Cammy, to use it in the on the Blu-rays and the DVDs as bonus material, and even on streaming services as bonus material. It was, and it's not out of, and it's not anything against the films, because the people who worked on the films did fantastic jobs, and they're dedicated filmmakers and things like that. This is really about business, and this is really about the business that artists get trapped in and get forgotten very easily, and where the boundaries lie of what is allowed and what isn't allowed, and how do artists enforce those boundaries when they're at the mercy of very large corporations with extremely deep pockets and the ability to throw huge amounts of resources at basically keeping everything secret. And that's really where it led to, is the fact that I just decided, because my nature as an artist is the fact that I will challenge.
Yeah.
And
Like you
I'm
said earlier, actors
yeah,
just built to rebel, yeah.
yeah, and so I thought, nobody has done this before. Actors have done it in Los Angeles before. Many have sued or gone to court when they've got ripped off for their royalties and things like that. But those are usually very, very large, wealthy actors who have very established careers, who can hire. And in the unusual case, not being able to do that, I became the lawyer, and I started studying law, and started trying to understand what it is to go down that path. And I figure at the end of the day, if there's nothing else in it, there's definitely a book and a documentary.
So that's about, which streaming platform will you pick to put it on?
I think Netflix might be interested. I don't know.
Really? Yeah, yeah. Go make it, civilized, nice BBC iPlayer, started
Yeah.
out doing BBC
Well, it
shows, I
was
think.
really, people. I think people, when they actually look at the law case, or they look at the what was found in that, I didn't go just after Lucasfilm, Disney. I went after Apple. I've gone after Warner's. I've gone after the list of defendants is seven long, which includes Topps and Hasbro and that.
Mhm.
Because what you have is, you have a situation where you have a film that was made, and the contracts were not honored,
Mhm.
and yet everybody who is downstream. So what you have, the best way I could describe it is, you have perpetrators and you have the enablers. And so you can only imagine how many companies that are listed around Lucasfilm that are enablers, people who were benefiting from it but never said anything. And not only didn't they say anything, but they also didn't even check the contracts existed.
Yeah.
Make sure that what they were licensing actually was allowed to be licensed, that nobody looked to see that the contracts were there in place and being covered properly, and not raising any questions. And it's an interesting thing. There's an interview with Robert Iger, chairman of Disney, where he starts to hint at it, that there's a possibility that when Disney actually bought Lucasfilm, they did see a problem,
Mhm.
because he, in a shareholder interview with some press and very large shareholders, he actually talks about there are some problems with the early films.
Yeah.
He doesn't go into depth in that, but when you spend $4.2 billion on purchasing Lucasfilm, you would think that the due diligence should be pretty damn good.
Mhm.
And so I don't know what they found. And this is the veil of secrecy that exists within corporations in that. And the hard part for anybody, whether you're a big star or not, or anybody pursuing this, is piercing that veil of secrecy.
Mhm.
Yeah. So it's interesting. It's a learning curve, I have to admit, and I wouldn't envy anyone who wants to take it on, but I appreciate the amount of information and knowledge I am gaining from it. And because I think, in the end of the day, it's also for me to have the opportunity to share it with other artists and say, check your contracts. Don't be naive. Do the digging. Ask the questions. Don't be afraid to ask the questions, and stand up and know, because if you if an artist is in that situation and they turn around and all of a sudden they see people making huge amounts of money off their work, and then they feel slighted, or they feel ripped off by it. Well, you have there are tools, and there are ways, and so it's important for you to know what read your contracts. Don't wait for an agent or somebody to tell you that. Read your con, ask the questions, do the digging.
It's interesting because it's sort of it's a similar case to the Crispin Glover case from Back to the Future,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
with actors' likenesses and stuff and being used when they haven't got permission.
yeah. And this is not, there's a lot that have gone by the wayside and never been spoken of.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And so it's not until you raise those issues and you kind of make it become aware. I mean, I haven't had the time or the energy to make it aware publicly as much as possible. But I think now is the case still goes forward. It's now in the appeal court, and so we'll see where it goes.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And one of the interesting things with Star Wars is because it's a global exploitation. There are a lot of courts around the world you can go to.
Yeah.
You can raise the case in Australia, China, you name it, where Star Wars is being released in that. You can raise the court case in every single one of those courts. It's fascinating, really, when you get into it. Yeah.
Yeah. Has it made you reconsider? Are you thinking of, taking up a lawyer? Are you going to go from
No, no,
acting and mu music work to some
no,
law
no.
work?
I wouldn't do that. But I think maybe there's times when I might think, if people want to sit down and have a chat about it, to do maybe do a TED talk or something. I don't know.
Hmm.
I don't
Mhm.
know. I think the first thing is to see where the case goes and stuff like that.
Yeah.
They've tried to block me in several ways. And these are large corporations, and they will do everything that they possibly can to keep the secrets that they have. I
Mhm.
mean, if you know the movie Snowden,
Mhm.
Mhm.
the Oliver Stone film. Well, again, good filmmaker, Oliver Stone. In Snowden, there's an expression. There's a phrase that comes out in the movie where I think it's Gordon Levitt, isn't it? He plays Snowden. He says, secrecy equals security equals victory.
Yeah.
And that is kind of almost like a mantra that he's exploring, that from within the National Security Agency in the United States. And it's as if, the corporations tend to operate that, using that kind of mantra as well. Secrecy equals security equals victory.
Yeah. And that's it. If you open, if they open the floodgate for even a bit, the whole thing's gonna bust open, isn't it? All the secrets will come out and
Yep.
everyone will. So I think, yeah, that's why they've tried to keep it as secret as possible.
Yeah, and and when I filed the case originally, I didn't file it just on my behalf. I filed it on the behalf of other actors as well who are similarly affected, and the estates of other actors who were similarly affected, because there's many actors now who've passed away,
Yep.
especially from the original film.
Hmm.
And in many cases, this instance of monies being withheld and things like that, for many people, that can be life-changing, because that's money they could have given to their kids to go to college, or they could have helped a family member, for instance, with a surgery or something like that.
Yeah.
And yeah, I just think it's important. I'm one of those people who's undeniably always challenging justice, or wanting to see justice be done.
Yeah.
A
Yeah.
It's
true a
great.
true rebel at heart.
Mhm.
Oh yeah, yeah. Yeah. Well, I think maybe it comes with age as well. You kind of, I don't know, maybe I've got more fearless as I've gotten older. You see, I don't have that issue. I mean, I know when you're, especially a lot of act, will not go up against the studios or not go up against a situation like that simply because they don't want to get blacklisted, as David Prowse did get blacklisted from attending conventions and that. They don't want to get blacklisted and because they need the resources, they need the money, they need the work, etc. And so what happens within the system is you get blacklisted as a troublemaker. And and so a lot of people are very afraid of sticking their, don't, and I understand, totally understand it. Everybody's got bills to pay, things like that. I completely understand it. And so maybe it's just because of the fact that I've become a little more ferocious in my older years. Yeah.
Well, speaking of, you're an older gentleman now, but you've sort of dipped your toe into like stepping behind the camera and
Right.
making movies. So you made a short film last year. Was it The Ballad of Bob's Garage?
Yeah, the Babbitt, that's actually it was made not last year, it was made years ago, and it
Hmm.
was going to be released. And I've kept putting it off simply because I've never been really comfortable with what I've been doing in terms of the editing room.
Hmm.
I mean, and one of these days I might pull it out. It was really shot in the year 2000, 2001. And it was really but it was all shot on mini DV cameras, multiple mini DV cameras. And it's really a story of what happens to five guys in the garage one night when things go wrong in this situation in Toronto when they normally get together to party and they get drinking and there's drugs in that. And one of them gets shot. And in that story, what happens is the guy who's been shot is afraid that he's not going to have that he might not make it, and he's not going to have the opportunity to tell the guy that accidentally shot him that he's in love with him.
Mhm.
And the guy who he's in love with happens to be a homophobic. So it's a
Oh.
real, it's a real dramedy in the way that the story is told, but the performances are really wonderful. And I just really feel I need to give it that much time, and I've set it aside for various reasons and that, and I've kept setting it aside. But it is the whole film, all the footage is still there, and I've done edits of it. It's just I thought no, I'm not. It's not right yet. I just and maybe maybe I'm being too pedantic, too careful. I don't know. That happens. It happens with writers as well, where they go over a page 100 times.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, obviously being an artist, you're a very creative man. You've making films, being in films, but also you've a huge catalog of music as well.
Yeah, my music. I started in music. Like many people during the late 60s and stuff, a lot of stuff that was going on in music. So you end up in a band in high school with friends and stuff like that from high school or different high schools. And you end up doing gigs and things like that. And then I actually decided to go and study music. So I went to college and that, and I was studying. I was going to study. I I never felt that I had the discipline to become an orchestra musician. Into class. I was always interested in classical music, and I did. But naturally, if you're interested in music, you're interested in lots of types of music as well. So that, and also it's great to hang out with your buddies and play rock and roll and that. And so I was really studying classical music, but at the same time, I then started to kind of go off to one side to look at composition because I was a big fan of Frank Zappa.
Mm.
Yeah. And I must say, I must have seen him perform almost a dozen times with his band, the original band, Mothers of Invention. So I was a big Frank Zappa fan, and that was, a big inspiration. Incredibly talented individual, huge, huge, huge genius at composition at all levels in music. And so I really kind of got very much interested in composition, and so that there were a few years where I was studying composition, and then the band had an opportunity to go out on the road, and so we went out west in Canada and that. And but when we got back, I realized, anyways, I'm still broke. Didn't make any money on that, and so that's when the opportunity. I've been doing theater in high school and places like that, so I decided to explore that a bit, and it just seemed to work. Things just seemed to fall into place. But it was when I was in England acting that I ended up getting back into music again and meeting a lot of great musicians and having the opportunity to actually go into the studios and work with some very, very talented engineers and production people, and and also work with some great musicians. Yeah, I had the benefit of having the production support from RCA Records to go in and take bands in and produce them. And so I could basically hire some session musicians who were great, that were um, just really superior. It worked on many albums with a lot of great people. I remember I had Raphael Ravenscroft. I don't know if you know who Raph is. Raph is a sax player on Baker Street.
Mm.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Yeah.
Oh yeah. London, especially, I don't know what it's like now, but London is such a village where you, again, you could get a hold of people and say, "Can you come in and do a session?"
If somebody was to turn around to you tomorrow
Yeah.
and say, Anthony, you're only allowed one creative outlet going forward. This is it. You can either make your music or you can act.
Yeah.
What are you going to go for? Where does your heart really lie?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question these days. I'm always doing something creative. And if you go to a website called Anarchy in Art,
Hmm.
all one word, .uk,
Hmm.
you'll see some of the craziness that I've been involved with lately. And it's it's something that occurred to me just a while ago, um, when I was looking at how I was going to create the cover for the book that I might write about the law cases and stuff like that. And
Hmm.
so you take a look at it and you'll see that. And then I discovered the fascination of creating satire and social commentary through posters.
We'll get people to check that out. And
Oh
I
yeah,
think
we'll
one
definitely
of
link it.
one of our
Mhm.
previous guests actually has a weird connection to you, sort of connection. Tim Burton was a guest. He runs a lot of musical events, a lot of orchestra events for John Williams films.
Okay.
Um, but his father was in the uh, what's the word, Danny? The Grand Philharmonic Orchestra,
The London Philharmonic.
London
Okay.
Philharmonic, and he played on the soundtrack for The Spy Who Loves Me,
Okay. Yeah.
which
Yeah.
Hmm.
of course you were in.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So,
That's
so it's a
interesting.
small world.
Yeah.
Oh, it is. I mean, it is, in terms of whether you're jumping in and out of music or films or anything like that, even writing and that, there's a lot of villages,
Mhm.
and all the villages interconnect in one way or another. Um, and I think it's more acceptable nowadays. Maybe it isn't, but it's become much more acceptable to having several strings to your, aspects to your career, and following wherever your creative interests take you.
Mhm.
There's there's fashion designers who've become filmmakers. There are, there's musicians who've become fashion designers. It's all, it's all within the spectrum of the creative process.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And in one way or another, it's all storytelling in its own way, and having creative outlets. I think it's one of the things we have to maintain, and possibly as we move into the AI generation, maintain it even more so that we have still maintain our unique voices.
Yeah.
That's I think it's in a way that's the whole podcasting uh, uh, area is all about being creative. You know, putting and it's also about communication as well.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's it. We wanna talk to people who like ourselves are Star Wars fans and want to, be able to talk because we don't just talk to people like yourself who have been involved in Star Wars. We
Yeah,
talk to
yeah.
people who are fans. We talk to people who create off the back of Star Wars. We had a fantastic prop maker called Lauren from Northern Ireland on talking about how Star
Right.
Wars got into engineering and 3D printing and
Right.
it's that kind of outlet. And then even from that, for Adam and I, we've got to make like little videos and pieces of content for our socials and that sort of thing. Because we both are creative. Adam's a filmmaker as well. And I did media studies at uni and it allows us to have that creative outlet that we wouldn't normally have in our day-to-day jobs. So
Right, right. Yeah. And that is, in a way that balance is very important. I think it's incredibly important for people to have those outlets and things like that.
Mhm.
And to we don't we have to have something more than being a slave to the system.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's a good positive message to end out.
Yeah.
Luckily, we have an audience that is very creative, and I think they'll find this chat and the inspiration you've given to people, Anthony. I think they'll find it very rewarding.
And I think it's, and that's why, when we talked, about the fact of meeting the fans, and that's what I've always been um, impressed with is the fact that I like meeting the fans because I discover the fans have so much talent and so many interests, right?
Mhm.
And they have so much to contribute as well.
Mhm.
And it's that's incredibly rewarding.
But thank you very much, Anthony, for joining us today.
Okay,
For
my pleasure.
giving us your time. It's fantastic. Would you like to tell us again about your website? It's
Anarchy and Art
Anarchy and
dot
Art.
UK. Yeah.
UK.
All one word. That's the artist is Anarchy and Art dot
Mhm.
UK. Yeah.
Is there
Fantastic.
anything else? Is there anything else you would like to plug?
Um, yeah, there's a couple other things I'm involved with, but they're not yet coming. They're not they're not as creative. They are creative in a way, but they're not as creative as maybe Anarchy and Art is. And I'm learning to be very creative in law, put it that way as well.
Yes. Mhm.
I'm learning exactly how it's the fact that law is a fascinating subject, but there's an awful lot of traps in it,
Mhm.
and you have to be very careful of the traps that you don't fall into them or you don't miss them.
Mhm.
It's a little bit like navigating a video game. It's very easy to fall down a well here or that because you've got to recognize the traps that are being set. Yeah.
Ironically, you have become the fixer.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I am actually, and maybe that was the destiny. That was maybe the purpose of it all in the end. Is the fact not to be in the film, but to actually start fixing other things within the industry.
But thank you very much for joining us, Anthony. Danny, thank you for joining me as always as my co-host. We'll be back next week for more mayhem. Go check out our socials, Instagram, X, YouTube, TikTok, all the usual malarkey. But we'll be back next week for more fun. And as always, we have friends everywhere. Thank you guys.
Bye bye.
Thanks very much, guys.
What is this shit? Everyone's looking for us today. We're ducking Trisha because she wants to talk to Obi-Wan here about her video setup.
Why him?
Silent Bob's an electrical genius. He won the science fair in 8th grade by turning his mom's vibrator into a CD player using some chicken wire and shit. Motherfuckers like MacGyver. No, motherfuckers better than MacGyver. Knock it off.